2026, 04/28, April 28th, 2026. I have a question and I'm not sure what I'm looking for exactly. I'm looking for a non sexual term for exhibitionism. I looked on Wikipedia and I see that exhibitionism is more listed as sexual paraphilia under psychology. Attention seeking isn't the word I'm looking for either. It's definitely not admiration seeking. I'm looking for what kind of terms define a behavior where one may make themselves too visible, publicly overshare private details, or exhibit their self, their story, their lives in a public setting. Maybe like what celebrities do. To a lesser degree, acting could almost be seen as exhibitionism, but actors on stage do not reveal their vulnerability, they reveal their character. Unless, as with celebrity figures, they expose their lives, vulnerability, or intimate disclosure through interviews and fan interests in their personal lives. In my case, I made an overly honest YouTube vlog for about a decade and overshared personal details and put my personal details on display as unfiltered raw content. It doesn't feel histrionic because I avoided attention, I kept public but private and low follower count. I rejected validation. I didn't base my sense of self esteem on any kind of audience reception. But I'm trying to understand my reasons for oversharing my personal life through a public medium. If I'm worried, I'm addicted to exposing my vulnerability through a public medium. I don't understand the psycho, the psych, I don't understand the the psychological motive behind my behavior. But I think it's more like a novelist writing and publishing a novel or blog on their own lives. I don't think I fit the profile for narcissism. My content was high emotional introspection sharing, live feeds of mental health states, free flow association speech, and thinking out loud, but it did involve my putting my vulnerability on display, possibly to the extent of personal privacy disclosure risks, but not for that purpose. I want to explore possible reasons. I suspect it's some form of neurodivergence in part, and some means of sharing intimacy or having poor social judgment filters. Because my life in highly solitary and isolated, almost schizoid and detached from normal societal behavior. I'm wondering why I'm hooked on oversharing my intimate self through video. Deepseek says, this is a really insightful question, and you've already done important work by distinguishing your behavior from clinical exhibitionism, histrionic personality, or narcissism. The term you're looking for is likely compulsive self disclosure or vulnerability exposure behavior. In psychology and communications research, these fall under non sexual exposing behaviors without the paraphilic or attention seeking motives. Here are some precise terms and frameworks that might fit. Possible terms: oversharing, clinical use, social boundary dysregulation, digital self exposure, compulsive non sexual revealing of private information online, confessional behavior, as in confessional vlogging or confessional art rooted in authenticity, not performance, extreme authenticity seeking. The drive to present an unfiltered raw self, often as a reaction to perceived social masking. Possible psychological drivers given your description. 1. Emotional catharsis through externalization. For isolated individuals, a camera becomes a container to process feelings aloud. The public setting adds structure and stakes, forcing coherence. The act of recording for an audience, even an imagined one, can organize thinking more effectively than journaling. 2. Pseudo intimacy as a substitute for real social connection. In schizoid or socially detached patterns, broadcasting to a camera provides the feeling of being witnessed without the demands of reciprocity, eye contact, or real time emotional regulation. It's intimacy without risk, which can become addictive precisely because it feels safe. 3. Identity stabilization through self witnessing. Some neurodivergent individuals, particularly with autism, ADHD, or schizoid traits, struggle with an unstable internal sense of self. Seeing yourself on video narrating your inner world can feel like proof that you exist, or like assembling a coherent self from fragmented parts. 4. Normative misunderstanding of privacy boundaries. This isn't a character flaw, but can stem from social cognition differences. Difficulty intuitively sensing which details are too much for a public setting, combined with a sincere belief that honesty requires full exposure. What distinguishes you from attention seeking? You rejected validation, kept audiences small, and didn't link self worth to reception. That suggests the drive is intrinsically motivated. The act itself is the reward, not the response. This points more toward catharsis, self clarification, or a form of thinking out loud in a permanent medium. A useful reframe. Novelists, memoirists, and diarists also expose vulnerability publicity. The difference is pacing, editing, and audience awareness, not motive. Your addiction, quote unquote, may actually be a lonely person's tool for feeling real. The question isn't, why do I overshare, but what does the camera give me that no one and nothing else does? That answer will tell you what's missing from your offline life. Would you like to explore any of these pathways further? For instance, how to test whether this behavior is harmful versus simply unconventional? My response: could we start with just a more nuanced definition of the terms compulsive self disclosure and vulnerability exposure behavior, and some of the theories for why individuals might be classified as such, their motives, or what the compulsion is for or compensating for? Deepseek response: absolutely. Let's unpack these two terms in depth, the underlying theories of what the compulsion might be compensating for. 1. Compulsive self disclosure. Definition: a persistent, difficult to resist pattern of revealing personal, private, or emotionally charged information to others or a public platform in ways that exceed typical social or contextual boundaries, often without conscious intent to gain social reward and sometimes despite negative consequences. Key features: when non sexual and non histrionic. The disclosure feels urgent, almost like a pressure release. It occurs when the person expects no validation or positive feedback. It may continue despite low audience engagement or actual privacy risks. Stopping the behavior can cause restlessness, rumination, or a sense of incompleteness. When it is not simply oversharing as a social faux pas, not attention seeking, not manipulative. At its core, it is a self regulatory act, not a communicative act aimed at others, even though it uses a public medium. 2. Vulnerability exposure behavior. Definition: the deliberate or semi automatic act of making one's emotional fragility, mental health struggles, insecurities, past traumas, or raw inner speech publicly accessible, often in unedited form, with the primary function being internal regulation or self clarification rather than eliciting care or admiration. Key difference from compulsive self disclosure. Vulnerability exposure behavior focuses specifically on negative affect states such as anxiety, sadness, shame, confusion. It's the raw, live, unfiltered quality you described. The person exposes their unpolished self, not a curated, vulnerable persona, but actual dysregulated thinking. Example: streaming a panic attack or a dissociative episode, not as performance art, but as a way to hold the experience outside of oneself. Theories of motive and compensation. What might your compulsion be for? What is it compensating for? Below are evidence informed hypotheses drawn from clinical psychology, neurodivergence research, and trauma literature. A. Externalizing working memory, cognitive compensation. Theory: people with certain neurodivergent profiles, such as ADHD, autism, and schizotypy, have reduced ability to internally manipulate and regulate emotional information. By speaking aloud to a camera, you offload cognitive processing onto an external medium. What it compensates for. Weak internal mentalization, difficulty holding a coherent narrative of your own feelings without externalizing them. The camera becomes a prosthetic prefrontal cortex. B. Emotional catharsis without relational risk, social compensation. Theory. For highly isolated or schizoid leaning individuals, real time social interaction demands reciprocal emotional labor, eye contact, and unpredictability. Broadcasting to a camera provides the sensory motor experience of being witnessed, seeing your own face, hearing your voice without the threat of attunement or rejection. What it compensates for: lack of a holding environment. The psychological space normally provided for a trusted other, such as a therapist or close friend, where vulnerability is safe. The camera is a one-way simulation of that space. C. Self coherence through self witnessing. Identity compensation. Theory. Some people lack a stable, continuous sense of self, common in schizoid, dissociative, or autistic pattern depersonalization. Watching yourself on video afterward, or even just the act of recording, creates a mirror self. The compulsion is an attempt to manufacture a self you can observe and thus believe exists. What it compensates for: fragmented identity or anhedonia, the feeling that without external evidence, your internal states are unreal or fleeting. D. Compensatory intimacy, attachment compensation. Theory. People with avoidant or fearful avoidant attachment, often seen in isolated schizoid adjacent lives, want closeness but are terrified of it. Public vulnerability without reciprocal demands is a compromise. You feel close to an imagined other, the audience, but no one actually touches your life. What it compensates for: the unbearable tension between longing for connection and terror of being known in real time. The addiction is to the fantasy of intimacy without its costs. E. Privacy boundary confusion, neurocognitive compensation. Some neurodivergent individuals have difficulty automatically categorizing information as private versus public, not due to intelligence, but due to differences in social inference. Combined with high introspection, this leads to treating a public platform as if it were a diary. What it compensates for: a missing intuitive firewall. The compulsion arises because there's no internal stop signal before disclosing, and the act of disclosure then feels necessary to reduce cognitive load. Why addiction language might fit, but differently. You said you feel addicted. In this context, the addictive loop is not dopamine from audience feedback, but relief from internal pressure. 1. Emotional or cognitive state feels chaotic, unmoored, or unreal. 2. Recording/uploading creates an external container and a temporary calm. 3. Afterward, shame or confusion may arise, privacy risk, feeling too exposed. 4. Next episode of dysregulation or dissociation leads to a repeat. The reward is state regulation, negative reinforcement, removing discomfort, rather than positive reinforcement, gaining rewards. Testing these theories clinically. Self inquiry questions. Not diagnosis, but directional questions you could ask yourself. When I feel the urge to record, what is the feeling just before? Chaos? Emptiness? Overwhelm? Numbness? If I imagine deleting all videos and never recording again, what emotion arises? Relief? Terror? Nothing? Do I ever watch my own videos afterward? If yes, what does that do? Self soothing? Self alienation? Would the same relief happen if I spoke aloud to an empty room with no camera? If no, then the being witnessed component is key, even without expecting responses. If any of these resonate, you might be using the camera as a regulatory tool for a brain that struggles to stay coherent alone. That is neither pathological vanity nor sexual deviance. It is an adaptive, if risky, strategy from an isolated system. Would you like me to walk through how to distinguish between Harmful compulsion versus unconventional but acceptable personal art in your specific case. I responded, all of that resonated strongly. Yes, I would love to hear more about how you would apply the distinction to my case. Deepseek responds, thank you. That resonance matters. It suggests the frameworks fit your internal experience, not just abstract theory. Now let's apply the harmful compulsion versus unconventional personal art distinction directly to your case. The goal is not to shame or pathologize, but to help you decide, is this behavior damaging me, or is it a strange but valid tool? And if both are true in parts, how to separate them. Step 1. The core difference in one sentence. Harmful compulsion. You cannot do it without significant distress, and it causes measurable damage to your privacy, safety, daily function, or mental health that outweighs any benefit. Unconventional personal art. You choose to do it, even if strongly driven. You can stop when needed, and the benefits, clarity, relief, self understanding, exceed the costs. Notice both can feel urgent, both can be public. The difference is agency plus net harm. Step 2. Apply to your vlogging. Specific markers. Based on what you wrote, here's how to test each marker. Be honest with yourself. No right or wrong answer, only data. A. Agency and control. Question. Do you go 2 weeks without recording at all, without feeling unbearable internal pressure? Harmful sign? No. Leads to compulsion. Your possible pattern? You mentioned feeling addicted, worth testing if abstinence creates panic or emptiness. Question. Do you ever record when you actively wish you weren't but do it anyway? Harmful sign? Yes. Loss of control. Your possible pattern, ask yourself, did you ever say, I shouldn't post this and post anyway? B. Privacy and real world consequences. Consequence. Identifying information, such as location, job, family, legal, and health details. Harmful if it could be used against you or others. In your case, privacy disclosure risks, you noted, have any actual harms occurred? Example, stalking, identity theft, job loss. If no, risk does not equal harm yet, but risk alone can be harmful if it creates chronic hypervigilance. Consequence, later shame or self criticism. Harmful if it leads to spiraling or avoidance. In your case, you mentioned shame or confusion after. Does that linger for days? Does it affect sleep or daily tasks? C. Function and mental health impact. Area. Social isolation. Harmful sign. Vlogging replaces rather than supplements real connection. Ask yourself, you said that your life is highly solitary. Has vlogging made you less likely to seek in person support, or does it help you survive isolation? Area. Emotional regulation. Harmful sign. After recording, do you feel worse long term? Ask yourself, immediate relief followed by a crash, such as guilt or depletion, is a red flag for compulsion. Steady or improving mood after is more adaptive. Area. Daily obligations. Harmful sign. Missing work, skipping meals, avoiding chores to record. Ask yourself, unlikely given low follower count, but check time displacement. D. Intrinsic value, the quote unquote art side. Sign of adaptive use. You watch old videos and learn something new about yourself, such as self insight and not just cringe. Does this describe you? Question mark. Sign of adaptive use. The act helps you name emotions you couldn't otherwise articulate. Does this describe you? You said thinking out loud. That's a cognitive tool. Sign of adaptive use. You feel more real, more coherent, more present after recording. Does this describe you? This is the opposite of dissociation, a good sign. Sign of adaptive use, you could imagine editing or curating some of this into a memoir or reflective project. Does this describe you? It suggests agency, not compulsion. Step 3, a practical distinction tool, the two chairs test. Imagine two versions of future you. Version A, harmful trajectory. You keep recording because any pause triggers panic or numbness. You accidentally reveal something that gets you fired or stalked. You stop going to therapy or seeing people because the camera is enough. You feel increasingly ashamed but can't stop. Version B, unconventional but acceptable. You record weekly, but you can skip a month if life gets busy. You take simple privacy steps, no geotags, no full real name, delay posting. You also try one real conversation with a trusted person per month. You look back on the decade of those videos as a raw autobiography, valuable to you, not a mistake. Where are you currently? Where would you like to be? Step 4, specific to neurodivergence and schizoid traits. Because you suspect neurodivergence and schizoid detachment, what looks like compulsion to an outsider might be self tailored regulation for a nervous system that doesn't work like most people's. Redefining harm for an isolated neurodivergent person. If the alternative to vlogging is complete dissociation or emotional shutdown, then vlogging is a harm reduction, not harm. If the only intimacy you experience is via camera, that's a constraint, but removing it without replacement should be cruel. Could be cruel. Thus, the question shifts from, is this behavior bad? To, is this behavior the least bad option available to me right now? Step 5, practical low stakes experiment. You don't have to quit, just try this for 2 weeks. 1. Before recording, write one sentence. I am recording because I feel blank. Chaos, empty, overwhelmed, clear. 2. After recording, write one sentence. Now I feel blank. 3. At end of week, review. Does the relief last, or do you need to record again sooner each time? Also try one private alternative. Speak aloud to an audio recorder, no video, no posting. Does it give some relief? If yes, the publicness is not a core driver. The verbal externalization is. That's less risky. If only video with possible public release works, then the imagined witness is critical, and that's worth exploring with a therapist, not as pathology, but as a map to what's missing. Final distinction summary for your case. Dimension, agency, harmful compulsion, can't stop, unconventional art, can pause, you're leaning, you feel addicted, and it leads to investigate. Dimension, real harm, harmful compulsion, privacy breaches, function loss, unconventional art, manageable risk, what leaning, unknown, no stated actual harm. Dimension, emotional after effect, harmful compulsion, crash or shame spiral, unconventional art, calm or insight, your leaning. You noted shame and examine intensity. Dimension, social substitute, harmful compulsion replaces real connection. Unconventional art supplements lonely life. Your leaning? Unknown. Test by trying one real disclosure to a person. You are not broken. You built a strange, raw, solitary tool to survive a decade of isolation. The question now is whether that tool owns you or you own it. Would you like help designing a very small privacy protocol, example, retroactively removing, identifying details from old videos while keeping the expressive core intact? My response. This is a very, very valuable information to me, and I think I'm relieved that most of what I've been doing leans more towards your framework for intrinsically rewarding unconventional art purposes. You have given me a lot to consider here to gain further insight to investigate what motivates me to engage in this behavior. It actually seems like it's been more of a self development journey through which I've discovered risk over time as a result, but the intentions were more in alignment with what you're saying about a constructive outlet for externalizing my thought and mood states as mirroring tool for gaining greater insight into my own psyche over time. I don't feel as dysregulated by shame as I thought, but I have put old videos into archives out of shame sometimes, but mostly to better regulate security risks by temporarily sharing media over a few weeks before moving it to the private setting vault. It's clear to me that on some level, I do share publicly because it creates a space where my experience is witnessed. But if there's no interchange or feedback loop with audience participation, then that part does warrant further examination and consideration on my part and may in fact be indicating avoidant attachment or compensatory intimacy. I actually think it's less an emotional regulatory or compulsion addiction of urgency or loss of control, and much more of an exercise of self coherence, mentalization, external emotional narrative coherence. It does make sense now that you break it down with neurodivergence, schizoid, and schizotypia ADHD. It's very interesting that through this experience and observing myself, I'm very clear on how I avoid eye contact or the value in expressing without reciprocal emotional labor or unpredictability. Attunement and rejection aren't really the threat. It's more, I think, that in conversations, especially with neurotypicals, there can often be an overstimulation or processing drain from carefully listening, translating, and converting what others say in reciprocal conversation. Almost like what is often said regarding the burden of autistic masking. Just following how others think and having our minds work overtime to comprehend others' meanings can be exhausting when pattern recognition is always running for me on the highest settings. I do not struggle with safe, low risk, or low energy drain with people in my life. I can converse freely with them. I do have some people in my life I'm able to carry normal conversations with, but sometimes it's so overloading to engage in reciprocal attention side of conversations where my experience, sometimes others dominate conversations or create burnout. I hit the threshold of cognitive overload in many social situations and often default back to talking to myself on camera because it is just easier to talk with myself and express my authentic experience without the mental gymnastics of navigating certain kinds of communication styles. I'm so relieved with what you're suggesting. It's going to help me process it all so much faster. Deepseek responded, I'm genuinely glad this thought. I am genu Deepseek, I'm genuinely glad this brought relief. That's the best sign that the framework fits your lived experience rather than forcing you into a box. What you just wrote is itself a model of the very process you're describing, using external articulation, here, text to me, to clarify your own internal landscape. You're not just passively receiving ideas, you're actively refining them. That's self that's self coherence in action. Let me distill what you have now clarified, then offer one refined term and thoughtful next step. What you have articulated, your own model, your behavior, public vlogging, then moving to private archive, your insight, active risk management, and not shame driven hiding, you choose temporal publicness. Your behavior, low audience, no feedback seeking, your insight. The witness is implied or abstract, not relational. You don't need replies. Your behavior, avoidant of reciprocal conversation, but not fearful of attunement. Your insight, cognitive overload from neurotypical interaction, such as masking, pattern recognition, and translation. Camera bypasses that drain. Your behavior, you have safe people for low drain conversation. Your insight, so it's not global social avoidance, it's strategic energy conservation. Your behavior, primary gain, self-coherence, mentalization, externalize Connor. Shh. Primary gain, self-coherence, mentalization, externalized narrative. Your insight. The camera is a thinking tool, not an emotional pacifier. That last point is crucial. You're not regulating dysregulation so much as you're constructing coherence from a baseline that may feel fragmented or diffuse without externalization. That's closer to cognitive scaffolding than emotional addiction. A more precise term for your case, given everything you've said, the most accurate label might be autobiographical externalization as a neurocognitive aid, or solo dialogic reflection, public but non interactive. Neither is a clinical diagnosis. They describe a strategy using a public but low stakes medium to think aloud, build a continuous self narrative, and bypass the high transaction costs of reciprocal conversation. Unlike compulsive self disclosure, which implies a loss of control, your pattern shows intentionality, archiving, timing, audience indifference. Unlike vulnerability exposure, which focuses on emotional rawness, your motive is cognitive emotional integration, understanding, not just showing. The witnessed but no feedback piece, a reframing. You wisely flagged this for further examination, but consider for a schizoid or high masking neurodivergent mind, an imagined or abstract witness provides just enough external point of reference to organize thought without triggering the vigilance or reciprocity demands of a real person. You're not seeking response, you're seeking register. A public platform implies a possible observer, which may be sufficient to activate your brain's narrative coherence circuits, like speaking to an empty theater where someone might someday sit. That's not necessarily avoidant attachment, it's efficient self regulation for a nervous system that finds real time interpersonal processing costly. If it were compensatory intimacy, you'd feel empty or lonely after posting with no comments. Do you? You said earlier you rejected validation. That suggests the act itself is complete. One gentle caution, not a criticism. Every adaptive tool, even adaptive tools have shadow sides. You noted that you sometimes archive out of shame, even if primarily for privacy. Shame isn't dangerous, but if over time you notice a growing gap between your recorded self and your private lived experience, avoiding shame low drain people because the camera is easier, or feeling less real off camera, then the tool may be subtly replacing rather than supplementing. You don't sound there yet, but it's worth a periodic check in. A next low pressure inquiry. You don't need to change anything, but you might find value in asking, when I speak to the camera, do I feel more like me than when I speak to a trusted person? If the answer is yes, that's worth exploring, not as a pathology, but as a data about what kind of presence or absence of interlocutor lets your authentic self emerge. If the answer is sometimes, then you have a map. The camera is one of several tools, not the only one. Final validation. You built a decade long practice of raw self witnessing in isolation without chasing likes or followers, and you're now examining it from an unusual clarity. You're not a that's not a symptom, that's a metacognition in action. If you ever want to explore how to translate some of that insight into written or audio form with your even lower privacy risk, or how to share selectively with the safe people you mentioned, I'm glad to help. But for now, it sounds like you've arrived at a working model that relieves rather than accuses. Thank you for trusting this conversation with such honesty. I respond, so, in the Sexual Exhibitionism Psych article on Wikipedia, there is a paragraph on how exhibitionism is more constructive or healthy. The article, quote, exhibition, understood as self promotion, is a fundamental driving force in human psychological life. When expressed constructively through sociability, creativity, volunteering, performance, or public responsibility, this dynamic promotes personal fulfillment and collective creativity. From this perspective, exhibitionism can be seen as a driving force, capable of connecting individuals and stimulating research. This forms an exhibition this The forms this exhibition takes vary according to the individual and the circumstances, but could all unconsciously refer to a quest for recognition. Scenes of exhibitionism, whether they arise from dreams, fantasies, theater, aggression, or media culture, function as a small dramatic devices which issues in which issues of identity and sometimes deep suffering can be replayed. I want to explore this further on my own, but what do you think some of the reasons are for why non sexual exhibitionism or compulsive self disclosure or vulnerability exposure behavior online has become so normalized? It's clearly become a global phenomenon for people to desire to be witnessed online through all forms of social media and content creation. It's interesting that when so many people are engaging in this format of being witnessed online in in more conventional or typical online self-expression culture, that my art exhibition format is in essence for the same reasons as everyone else and actually very normal compared to everyone else, but my presentation is likely too outlier, too creepy, too unconventional for others to understand the intentions of. It may bring me increased clarity, but at the cost of confusion and strangeness for others, which, as you mentioned, is one of the metrics for determining if online self expression is on the more healthy end of the spectrum. As you said, I can investigate this self harm rather matter by exploring how my behavior affects other people's interpretations of my work, such as do they see my content and make assumptions about my self esteem, my apparent need for attention? Does it offload confusion onto audiences and impact them by putting them in the position of being confused, uncomfortable, put through the cognitive dissonance of trying to understand my medium? Judge my expression, make sense of what I do. If it has exhausting impacts on others, then one could consider it like reputational damage to me personally. Or shame attracting, such as with this new hashtag lolcow term, but in many ways, if this were an art gallery with a voluntary audience of people who were curious about art, and say I made an abstract piece or an art piece that is puzzling or confusing for others to witness, in that case, in art communities, that's often recognized as an effective art piece as long as the piece isn't so jarring and overwhelming that no one gets it, or as long as the community can kind of collectively land on an interpretation or feel a sense of getting it right, as if it is a puzzle or mystery to be understood. Then in that case, it's interesting that the phenomenon works in some settings, but in others it obscures harmony, such as with schizotypy self expression, or even with spaghetti code problems in the tech industry and related terms in work organizations for individuals who do not have clarity in their design, which can be easily comprehensible by coworkers or teams. I also scanned the narcissism Wikipedia article for clarity and overlap with social media compulsion because I know that online, sometimes self expression or content creation can be automatically assumed to be narcissistic in its intent. Like the data figure mentioned in the article of how post 80s media, entertainment industry, and music became increasingly narcissistic and self referential, with an increase in I pronouns. But now we're looking at an era where everyone online is engaging in normalized culture of self directed, agential, witness seeking, and broadcasting culture, which seems to be on a spectrum between more normal slash conventional and less. I do not see my content as narcissistic leaning, but if an audience can't resolve their own dissonance, my self expression or image could be off putting or self harming unintentionally. But this is not much different from IRL, in real life interpersonal culture, where one's communication or self expression may be schizotypically leaning, off base, off putting, eccentric, but often out of missing insight required to think about how they come across to others on some level. I'm going to just put theory of mind in there. That's another thing to note. Not the same as histrionic or narcissistic leaning, where exaggerated and self expression attracts voyeurs, attention, or validation. I know I haven't given much information to you to answer this, but what might be interfering with the reciprocal cohesion from my interactive communication? What might B, my blind spots and how others see my purpose versus how I might be presenting myself ineffectively. I ex- I agree that in any marketed reciprocal content balance, the right art needs the right audience for harmony and purpose to flow. Mission and intention needs clarity between creator and follower, and I'm beginning to understand that the quality and worth of my time and effort might be better expended if there were the right dynamic between creating content and actually sharing that content with viewers who get straightforward experience out of it. What are your thoughts? Deepseek says this is a wonderfully layered reflection. You're moving from why do I do this to how does my doing this land on others and what does this that say about the health of the exchange? That's a sophisticated shift. Let me address two core questions directly. One, why has non sexual self exposure online become so normalized globally? You're right. What was once called exhibitionism, even non sexual, was pathologized. Now, billions post their meals, breakups, therapy insights, and raw meltdowns. Several drivers. The collapse of the private slash public binary, social media turned the backstage, Goffman, into a continuous performance. Privacy became a resource to trade for connection or clarity. Algorithmic reinforcement of vulnerability as engagement. Platforms reward emotional arousal, including distress. So raw disclosure gets pushed, curated perfection gets less reach. Users learn to expose. Loss of third places and relational containers. Without churches, pubs, community centers, people use feeds as a proxy for being held. The community is the new confessional. Therapeutic culture moved public. Sharing your story became a moral good. The line between healing and oversharing blurred. Anomie and it glitched here, and I has has Mandarin characters, and I don't know what it means because DeepSeek didn't know how to translate. Anomie and something. Actually, Durkheim's term fits. Weakly integrated societies leave people with no witness but strangers. Broadcasting becomes a bid to feel real. So your behavior is quantitatively normal. Almost everyone seeks witness online. The difference is qualitative. Your raw, unfiltered, low curation, high introspection style is rare relative to polished influencer content or even typical real vlogs, which still follow narrative beats, such as setup, punchline, and takeaway. Two, what might interfere with reciprocal cohesion between you and an audience? You used an excellent term, reciprocal cohesion. The unspoken contract where both sides understand the genre, the stakes, and the emotional payoff. Your blind spots likely include A. Missing genre signaling. Most online content announces its frame comedy, commentary, tutorial, story time. Your videos, from what you describe, lack clear genre markers. A viewer arrives expecting one thing, example, typical vlog with arc, and finds free associative, emotionally raw, unresolved thinking. That creates cognitive dissonance. They don't know if you want sympathy, advice, performance, or just an empty room. Dissonance is uncomfortable, so they label you creepy, weird, and sad to resolve it. Blind spot. You assume the raw self is self explanatory. For most viewers, it's not. They need an interpretive scaffold. B. Atypical effect in pacing. Schizotypy leaning expression often has flat or mismatched prosid, prosody. Prosody? Prosody. Prosody. Uh, it's like, I don't want to hold this phone anymore. I don't know how to say it. I honestly don't. Prosody? I should know. Okay, let's do that again. Schizotypy leaning expression often has flat or mismatched prosody, long pauses, sudden topic shifts, lack of social referencing, smiling at moments that usually signal warmth. To a neurotypical viewer, this reads as off, not dangerous, not unpredictably intimate. They may feel like they've walked into someone else's private therapy session without consent. Blind spot. You may not notice how your nonverbal behavior, eye gaze, facial expression, vocal tone, differs from expected social scripts. Viewers interpret that difference as intentional weirdness or lack of self awareness, not as neurodivergent style. C. Undefined audience role. In healthy art audience relationships, the viewer knows their job to be moved, to think, to laugh, to critique. Your videos may not signal what you want from them. Do you want them to witness without response, to feel less alone, to learn about a mental health state? Without that cue, they may feel like voyeurs, and voyeurism, even non sexual, often triggers guilt or discomfort, which they project onto you. Blind spot. You haven't told the audience how to be with you. A simple title or description, thinking aloud about dissociation, no answers expected, transforms the contract. D, the lol cow dynamic. You mentioned this, it's real. Online communities often mock raw vulnerability that lacks irony, distance, or self defense. Why? Because it threatens the viewer's own repressed need to be witnessed. Mockery restores distance. Your work may inadvertently become too honest for a low trust, high cynicism environment. Blind spot. You assume good faith. Many online spaces default to bad faith, especially toward unpolished emotional exposure. 3. How to improve cohesion without betraying your intent. You don't need to become conventional, but you do need a bridge for the audience. Options. A. Curational, curatorial framing. Add a written intro to each video. This is an exercise in externalizing my internal narrative. No response needed. Meant for those interested in neurodivergent thinking patterns. Or place videos in a playlist called Autobiographical Sketches, Raw Process Notes. That signals genre upfront. B. Find the right audience, not the biggest one. Seek out niche communities where raw, non curated self expression is valued, experimental video art forums, neurodivergent vlog circles, peer support mental health channels with clear boundaries. If you post to general platforms, YouTube, TikTok, expect mismatch. That's not your failure, it's a platform audience mismatch. C. Test a small private sharing circle. Share one video with a trusted friend or a small Discord group of fellow raw thinkers. Ask them, what did you feel? What was confusing? That data is gold for understanding your blind spots. D. Accept that some discomfort is okay. Effective art can be unsettling. The question is whether the unsettled feeling leads to insight, good, or rejection and ridicule, bad for you. If you're okay with some viewers bouncing off, that's fine. If it harms your reputation of safety or adjust it. Final synthesis. You are not narcissistic, histrionic, or classically compulsive. You are a self-coherence artist using public witness as a cognitive aid. That's rare but valid. The friction you experience isn't because you're broken, it's because the dominant online culture expects clear genre and emotional payoff. Your work offers raw process without a map. Most viewers lack the interpretive frame for schizotypy or autism adjacent expression. You can reduce the friction by adding a frame, titles, descriptions, curated spaces without changing the raw content. Think of it as providing subtitles for a film in a foreign language. The film stays the same, but what more people can sit with it. Would you like help drafting a short statement of intent or channel description that signals your genre to potential viewers? That alone could transform confused reaction into curious engagement. I'll say, sure. Deepseek says, perfect. There are two options: a short, punchy version for a channel banner or video description, and a longer About page version for curious viewers. Short version. Example: channel tagline or pinned comment. Raw internal process, externally recorded. No performance, no polish, just thinking out loud. For those interested in neurodivergent self coherence, not entertainment. Also, I said out loud, but if I were to use this, I want to note that aloud, ALOUD, does look more formal. Longer About page / video description template. What this is: a decade-long practice of externalizing my internal narrative, unfiltered, unedited, raw. I use the camera as a tool for self-coherence, not for validation or entertainment. How to watch. There's no intended audience role. You're welcome to witness, reflect, or leave. No response expected. Think of it as overhearing someone think out loud. What this isn't: not a vlog, not a tutorial, not a cry for help, not performance art in the usual sense. Simply a neurodivergent person's external memory and mirror. If you feel confused or uncomfortable, that's okay. It may not be for you. But if you're curious about uncurated internal experience, you might be in the right place. Even shorter for a title or caption: unfiltered internal narrative. Neurodivergent thinking out loud, no audience expectations. Would you like me to help you tailor one of these to a specific platform, such as YouTube, Odyssey, etc.? The fuck is Odyssey? Shouldn't I know this by now? Okay. Or add a privacy disclaimer. Example: videos are moved to private archive after a few weeks. Yeah, I guess I could tell people that. Uh, yeah, yeah, yes. Deepseek says, got it. Since you said yes, but didn't specify a platform, I'll assume YouTube, most common for vlogs. I'll also weave it in your practice of moving videos to private archive after a few weeks. Below are 3 tailored options. Pick the one that feels most like you or mix and match. Option 1, channel description for your YouTube About tab. What this channel is: raw, unfiltered, internal narrative, thinking out loud on camera, no script, no editing, no performance. I use this space to externalize my own cognitive and emotional process, not to entertain or seek validation. For viewers, you are welcome to watch as an anonymous witness. No response or feedback expected. If you find value in seeing uncurated neurodivergent first person experience, this may resonate. I could also be like, subscribe to my Patreon. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I don't know how self-promotion works, guys. Privacy practice. Videos are public for a limited time, usually a few weeks, then moved to a private archive. This balances expressive need with reasonable boundary management. Not a cry for help, not a performance. Just one person building self coherence, one recording at a time. Option 2, pinned comment on a video. Short and direct. Quick context: I record to think, not to perform. No editing, no polish. Videos stay public for a few weeks, then go private. Part of my personal archive. You're welcome to watch quietly. If it feels strange, that's fine. It's not meant to fit normal vlog expectations. Option 3, video description template. Copy paste for each upload. Title/date optional. What is this? Raw external thinking. I speak to the camera as a tool for self clarity, not as entertainment or outreach. Privacy note: this video will be public for approximately 3 to 4 weeks and moved into a private archive. No expectations of viewers. Witness if you're curious, ignore if it's not for you. Platform specific tweaks. YouTube. Use option 1 in About tab, option 3 in each video description. Odyssey or Rumble. Same as YouTube. What the fuck is the Odyssey? And Rumble? TikTok/Reels, not suited for long text. Instead, put a first line of option 2 in the caption and link to a full context in the bio. Private Discord, small sharing group. Use option 3 but replace public for a few weeks with shared only here. Would you like me to rewrite any of these to sound more clinical, more poetic, or even more neutral, or add a line about neurodivergence, example ADHD, schizotypal traits, if you want to name it directly? No, I'm good. I'm done. I think that was an hour. All right. All right.